Thought I might do a little video about some of the books that I have here, and I'm just going to do them kind of in the order that they've been placed on the shelf, which isn't exactly specific. This is a popular science book that I had. It was popular around the time I was in seventh grade, and I got it in seventh grade, maybe at a Scholastic Book Fair or something, maybe in sixth grade. And I remember myself and several classmates would sort of flip through it during kind of that homeroom hour. It's just really cool, nice pictures, diagrams, explanations in readable ways. This is a complete history of China. It tries to condense everything in somewhat of a readable format. I never completed the book, but it is an interesting take to take everything from, antiquity basically until the modern era. Elements of China is somewhat of a coffee table book with lots of photographs. It says water, wood, fire, earth, gold. I think I got this in China. I think my godfather got me these two Chinese books. Here's another one when I was interested in China. I ended up going to China when I was 12 in 2005 with my godfather. Chronicle of the Chinese Emperors kind of goes through the Chinese emperors and give you some factoids and dates and artwork from around that period as well as some of the significant events. This was probably something I've had since I was a kid. I can't even remember. I mean, certainly elementary school, maybe before. Just a Pokemon book with those cool stickers in there. I really loved Pokemon as a kid. This is A Hungry Tiger of Oz. It's actually not written by the original Baum author of Oz, L. Frank Baum, but I believe that was a gift from my father when I was a kid. I was a fan of Wizard of Oz. 1,000 Facts About Space. I think my godfather gave this to me when I was a kid. It just has lots of stuff from Kepler to other unique things related to space. Bran Luther. This book, the central thesis is basically the reason Luther was so popular and successful is because he was able to sort of galvanize the printing market, and printing presses wanted to print more of Luther's publications rather than Catholic publications because there was a larger market to buy those publications. This is a big kind of a tome here, Blackwell Publishing, The Ethics of War. It has various readings from various philosophers, ethicians, and things like that. All the way back to, I think ancient times from Plato, Aquinas, Kant, Theories of Just War. It's an interesting read. I haven't completed it, of course, but just dipping here and there. Got this, I think my father got me this when I was like 15. I did Harvard summer school, and I did this in 2008. I took, in that Harvard summer school of 2008, I took a class on the Holocaust, and we read a number of books related to the Holocaust. It was the Holocaust in film, cinema, and literature. Absolutely incredible class, very emotional. I was with Professor Madigan. This is from Library of Jewish Studies, the Holocaust Reader. I remember reading through this. $4 contribution to Democratic National Committee on June 23rd, 2008. Curious. King Leopold's Ghost, A Story of Greed, Terror, and Heroism in Colonial Africa. It's an interesting book I read a number of years ago, I think in 2018 or 2019, about kind of how King Leopold had sort of developed this colony to be his own personal colony in Africa, and it ended up being a huge humanitarian crisis. Very interesting book. And an interesting glimpse into kind of African colonialism and the history around that time period. This is an interesting book. Heroes and Friends Behind the Scenes of the Treaty of Portsmouth. So basically during the Russo-Sino War in the early 1900s, Japan was the first country to defeat a Western power, or an Eastern power to defeat a Western power in modern times. And that treaty was actually signed in the United States, sort of a third party between Russia and the U.S., and Theodore Roosevelt sort of brokered that. And it ended up, even though Japan sort of won it, they had this famous battle, the Battle of Tsushima, where the Russians sailed their entire fleet around the Cape of Good Hope from the Baltic Sea, basically all the way up to Straits of Tsushima, which are between Korea and Japan, and basically had their entire fleet destroyed. And there were a number of observers, I believe Jackie Fisher was one of them, and he determined that those guns were the biggest guns there were the only ones that were used. So ships from that point forward would not use big guns, or would not use small guns. They'd use big guns, and that ended up leading to the development of the Dreadnought. And actually, the next book is the Dreadnought. But basically, the book, just finishing off on the Sino-Japanese War and the Treaty of Portsmouth, basically it created a little bit of animosity because the Japanese didn't get a good deal, and that has been cited in certain histories to indicate Japanese animosity towards the U.S. because they felt like Theodore Roosevelt and that cadre sort of brokered a deal that was unfair to the Japanese. And that leads me to Dreadnought, though, regarding the big guns. I haven't read this yet. Robert K. Massey, I believe, got a Pulitzer Prize for his history of Peter the Great. But this book, I was interested in Dreadnoughts in high school. I haven't read it yet, but I would like to, maybe at some point, maybe. I went to China. This is, I believe, from Columbia University Press. I have not read it yet. I don't know. I haven't read it, but perhaps it's a gift from my father. I'm not sure. Tear Down This Myth. How the Reagan Legacy Has Distorted Our Political Haunts Our Future. I haven't read this, but I think it was a gift to sort of give a level eye about these types of things with Ronald Reagan, because there does seem to be quite a bit of praise, but a lot of it, it's interesting. You need to have a balanced view of things. Sky High, Stories from Survival in Space. This is just, it seems like a fun book. I've sort of peered into it a little bit, dipped in here and there, but not too much. Battle of Gettysburg, a soldier's first-hand account. This is a very interesting book about the Battle of Gettysburg. It's interesting to read this in comparison with, I think, the Michael Cera book about Killer Angels, which was sort of the basis for, that show Firefly by that was created by Joss Whedon. The book after that is Barry Goldwater, Conscience of a Conservative, who was the candidate in the 1964 election. And he lost the presidential candidate for 1964 election. He lost that because he sort of suggested that he'd be willing to use nuclear weapons, or so that's how it was portrayed. And there was this famous commercial with a girl sort of counting down from 10 and taking off daisies, and that ended up being a big issue during that the LBJ campaign sort of listed. Conscience of a Conservative basically says there's a lot of conservatives who like to talk about business, but he says there's much more such culture and ethics in relation to conservatism. It's certainly an interesting read. Plato and the Platypus is sort of a comedy book, understanding philosophy through jokes. I think I got this in college or maybe sometime before or, after freshman year. Two books here. These kind of go together. Pathways to Possibility and The Art of Possibility. Art of Possibility is published or is written by Rosamund Stone Zander and Benjamin Zander, and the Pathways to Possibility is just Rosamund Stone Zander. And I actually got to meet her, and before I met her, I hadn't read these, but when I met her, she was a very nice person, and these are really interesting books, and I really like this notion and concept of possibilities. I think it's a truly wonderful and kind of beautiful notion, and I really loved it. It was cool to have met someone and spent some time speaking with them, and then doing an audiobook, listening to them read it, so that was really cool. The Zimmerman Telegram by Barbara Tuchman, well-acclaimed author, Barbara Tuchman, a historian. She basically argues that the Zimmerman Telegram might have been the main cause of U.S. entry into World War I, which is basically the Zimmerman Telegram was sent by the Germans to Mexico to say, we will help you reclaim your territory that you lost in the 1848 war with the United States if you help us in World War I against the United States. Little Paris Bookshop, my girlfriend recommended this to me, by Nina George. It's a beautiful book with a wonderful premise about the idea that books can be sort of given to you as a remedy to help heal you, in the sense that, like if you're sick, you sometimes go to the doctor and you get medicine, but you can get remedied by sort of reading certain books. So it's a Little Paris Bookshop. It's very beautiful, very good insight into France and Paris. And it's truly a book lover's kind of book. Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens. I think I've had this since either late middle school or early high school. And man, I mean, there's been so much said about Charles Dickens. All I can say is it's a very sad ending, but it's truly a beautiful ending to be stalwart and strong in the face of adversity. It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. beautiful ending. Very sad, touching. The Selfish Gene over here by Richard Dawkins, very interesting book. One of my buddies told me that this was one of his favorite books, and I just happen to have a copy of it. And I even have like this 1977 thing in here, The Selfish Gene, kind of a summary of it from by Michael J. Waite, Department of Biology, University of Chicago, Illinois, summarizing this book. It's an interesting take on the modern perspective on evolution and Darwinian thought. My grandmother, Alice, got me this book. I believe when I was in law school, maybe undergrad, about Francis Fukuyama and the Origin of History. I had been reading Francis Fukuyama's The End of History and the Last Man in relation to a number of things. Particularly, it was relevant for my senior thesis at Harvard. And this was just a really good book, kind of looking at Jean-Jacques Rousseau's and Thomas Hobbes' theories of like what society was like to begin with, and kind of taking modern archaeological evidence to see what the origins of political order are and how we kind of go from, these just small groups to tribes to, notions of state to notions of empire. And this is just the first book in the series, first volume. This is Flatland. It's a wonderful book. I'd seen a video about Flatland, sort of a modern interpretation, when I was in my last year of high school, I think, and I was doing like these studies at teachers' homes during the week, and we would just sort of study. I think maybe it was the last year of high school, and I really loved it. And then I ended up talking about it when I was a freshman at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. And it's basically this concept of like two-dimensional figures existing, like triangles, squares, and things like that. And that's how they interpret the world, kind of in this two-dimensional, one-dimensional space. And they sort of feel bad for points. They say, oh, points, they live in this like one-dimensional place or lines. And then this one, character, was he a square or a triangle? I think he was a square. He's taken out of the second dimension by like a sphere and thrown into like the third dimension. He sees everything, and he tries to go back and he tries to explain to second dimension creatures, how did this exist? How did this, what is? And they think he's crazy. And of course, this is sort of interesting allegory for Plato's cave in a way. I mean, of course, Plato's cave is sort of an allegory in itself, but it's another good metaphor to sort of explain Plato's cave. You go out there and you see the truth. You see the third dimension as a second dimensional being. You come back and you try to explain second dimensional beings, which in the same way, it would be difficult for someone who went to the fourth dimension and then kind of came back to our third dimension and tried to explain things to us. You can just imagine how difficult it would be to explain like multiple dimensions up. I mean, from a mathematical perspective, I think trying to explain up to a point, if you can conceptualize that, what the third dimension is like, try to explain to a line or a square. It's, assuming that they had like cognition and things like that, which does take a little bit of leap of thinking, but it is an interesting idea. The Technological Society, this was recommended to me because, I was studying Hegelian dialectics, and it's Jacques Ellul kind of, and in conjunction with Aldous Huxley, actually, I think was supporting and funding this, writes some of the troubles that exist in technological societies in relation to technique and getting things done. Jung in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, wonderful book, always interested in Jungian psychoanalysis as a response to Freudian psychoanalysis. It's interesting to me, he presents this idea, I think this was written in the 20s or 30s, but he says it was first published in English in 1933, so he had already been working, I guess, on evidence from the 1920s. He says a lot of people in the United States feel that they feel kind of they have midlife crises because they focus so much on work and they think everything is going well, but they sort of figure out everything at work and then things aren't going as well. It's just something interesting to think about. This is a book that my buddy Dylan recommended to me, The Four Agreements. But by the way, one more word on Jung. It's interesting to think about Jung in context of Freud, Jordan Peterson, The Modern World We Live In, Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. Throwing out a lot of words there, but that sort of all kind of coalesces into this interesting anthropological, psychological realm of things where you can kind of see the coalescence. That is to say, all these different points are kind of coming together. Who knows if you don't agree with it, but I would say it's interesting to start off with Jung as a response to Freud and then sort of start making those other connections. Here's a book that my friend Dylan recommended to me, The Four Agreements. The first agreement, be impeccable with your word. The second agreement, don't take anything personally. The third agreement, don't make any assumptions. The fourth agreement, always do your best. It's really interesting kind of Toltec approach to life. And I really liked it. It's like a very loving book and very beautiful. My friend Dylan got that for me for my 30th birthday, but I did it on audio a few months prior to that. Origin of Satan by Elaine Pagels. My buddy Dylan, a long story how this kind of came to me, but my buddy Dylan gave it to me for my 30th birthday, and he was, I'm just looking at this receipt. It's from August 26, 2022. So, but anyway, it's an interesting take. Christians, I would say the thesis of this book is like Christians always say those who are other to them are in line with Satan, whether they are other Christians, whether they are enemies. So Satan is always representative of the other. So it's just an interesting take on the origins of Satan, and it kind of goes through the ideas of Satan historically, and likewise like that. So it's an interesting historical analysis. I wouldn't say necessarily metaphysical, although it does have a mention of Jung in there. Surprisingly enough, now to think about it, I think it's one line, just as Jung kind of deals with it in a psychological sense. I'm showing these three books all at once because I took an American Housing Social Policy class at Harvard for the fall semester of 2011. Housing Policy in the United States, an introduction. What I love about these is that they bring back good memories because they have a lot of my notes in here. And it's really good times. Housing policy is very interesting to me. This was from tenements to the Taylor homes. This is just filled with my notes. I miss these days because I used to just read, and it was such a beautiful thing. I think this other one is the Housing Policy Revolution, Networks and Neighborhoods. It's interesting to think about reading these books in the context of reading that book, City of Quartz, that I read, years after Harvard, but, about a year or two ago. But they are interesting to me to consider kind of like how housing and networks and markets can sort of affect communities. And maybe that's something that's obvious, but it's just interesting to consider that in the context of that class that I took. Two books I'm going to show at once. Academic Legal Writing by Eugene Volokh. I've been referencing this for years. I absolutely love him. He's really great advice. He's a great writer, great author. He has really good stuff. His Volokh Conspiracy is a lot of fun. I've been using his advice truly for years, ever since I think I was a second-year law student. And he's, of course, indirectly helped me a lot through his publications. And I reference that academic legal writing a lot. Elizabeth Bajans, scholarly writing for law students, and Mary R. Falk. Great authors. I believe Mary R. Falk has passed away. I also reference this book a lot, and it's helped me quite a bit. This book, Neil Ferguson, I was a big fan of Neil Ferguson in high school and those summers that I spent at Harvard. I met him later on as a student at Harvard. But this book, Empire, had it, I think, in early high school, and I only got around to reading it about a year or two ago. It was really good. This book was a massive read. I ended up tabbing it and writing, not necessarily all over it, but there were certain portions that I wrote all over. It's about... just like the writing goes on and on. The Power Broker, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York. Basically, the reason I read this is because some friends from Washington, D.C. recommended it to me, and Ryan Holiday also recommended it on his show as well, and it ended up being a fantastic read. Robert Caro is amazing, and I love, I just loved that analysis, and well-deserving of the Pulitzer Prize. Some books that I haven't read. This is just Ludwig van Beethoven's Eroica, Symphony No. 3. It's just the music. I think either I was in college or like freshman year of college or maybe late high school. I was interested in picking it up. It's a Dover edition. This is Essentials European History. I remember I was at Harvard summer of 2008, and I just wanted to freshen up on kind of 1450 through 1864. I remember flipping through this and recognizing the Renaissance, Reformation, worlds of religion. I need to focus on some things. E.T.A. Hoffman and the Nutcracker and the Golden Pot. Nutcracker is a cool story. I've been going there to see it with my mother ever since I was a kid. We've got a number of Oz books here. Glinda of Oz, TikTok of Oz, Emerald City of Oz, Wonderful Wizard of Oz. It's interesting just to consider what kind of the idea of fantasy was at the kind of the early turn of the century, in a way. So that's why the Oz books are interesting to me. Long Walk is a great story about a Polish officer who was caught in Poland, transferred to the Soviets, had a sort of fake trial in this book, and is transferred all the way to this Camp 303 in like Siberia, and then has an escape where he goes, I think in the summertime, and he goes down south, and he passes Lake Baikal. He goes through Mongolia, the Gobi Desert. He goes through the intense landscape of Tibet, and then and also an intense landscape in India until he reaches British India. And it's just kind of this ragtag group that escaped from prison and had been going on and on. And it's just such a fascinating book, and there's so many twists and turns where things may have not worked out. Really interesting stuff. And a fascinating book. It turns out like his therapist recommended that he write that book later on in life. Getting to Yes, great book about negotiation. I took an alternate dispute resolution class in law school and ended up reading that book. Candide, Voltaire. I read that in high school. Good book, interesting illustrations. And when I was a freshman at St. John's, I picked up a copy of Winnie the Pooh in Latin. And over here, I just have some Shel Silverstein poems. Falling Up, Where the Sidewalk Ends, and A Lighthouse in the Attic. A Light in the Attic. Just mentioned those. I loved them as a kid, but I ended up purchasing these copies when COVID started. So those are some books that I have here. I'll show a few more. Tales of Beetle the Bard. Ended up really enjoying this book. First Salute, Barbara Tuchman, talking about the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And might as well end off with these two books. This is a poetry book that I wrote, put together, just an anthology of poems. And this is a book that I published in October of 2021, Dialectical Path of Law. Thanks for listening in on some of the books that I've encountered in my life.